So here's how the sample would have sounded if I just left it alone. Not a great way to start the beat, but after using what I just showed you, this sounds much better, and it's literally the exact same sample, the exact same chops. And this is probably my biggest piece of advice when trying to use samples in this way. Stay away from sounds like this. Sampling can be hard if you don't know the essential tips and tricks that more experienced beatmakers use. So today I'm going to share 7 tips that will help you make beats using samples and do so a lot easier. So I'll show you these tips by looking at this beat that I made that uses 4 different samples. So let's start by looking at the first sample. Here I'm using Serato, but all of this applies no matter what sampler you use. This sample does not sound good, it's kind of irritating, but if you use the technique that I'm about to show you, you can turn a bad sample like this into something amazing. Let me show you how. One of the most useful techniques when sampling is stereo isolation. This can help you isolate exact sounds that you want and remove others that you don't by controlling the levels of your stereo field. And you do this by using a stereo shaper. Let's listen to what's happening in the right channel of this sample. We get that crazy chaotic sound. This is the part of the sample that doesn't sound great. But if we play that exact same chop but only isolate the left channel, we get this amazing sounding keyboard. Now my sample is just far more useful by just using this one plugin that you probably have sitting around in your DAW that you just never use. Next, I'll also bring this fader up so it doesn't sound as lopsided, and I'll also use some panning to bring this closer to the center. I'll also add some chorus to add some stereo presence and some tape saturation. So here's how the sample would have sounded if I just left it alone. Not a great way to start the beat, but after using what I just showed you, this sounds much better, and it's literally the exact same sample, the exact same chops. Another problem that makes using multiple samples hard is that you have too many useless textures in your sample. Use an EQ to help you with this problem. So with our sample here, this whistling sounds pretty irritating, so let's EQ this frequency out as well as anything else that isn't really helping. Now this sounds much cleaner, giving us more space to add more layers and samples on top of what we've already built here. Let's introduce our next sample. When looking for samples to layer on top, I recommend not using samples like these. Samples with a ton of instrumentation. Sometimes isolating sounds like we just did won't be possible no matter what tools you use. It can make your life easier just using samples like these. Far more isolated, instantly making this easier to use. Now one big mistake producers will make when they try to use multiple samples is they'll build patterns like this. Whether you use samples or not, you don't always have to create patterns that last the entire loop. Picking and choosing pockets in your loop to add in a new layer can be a better strategy. So if we take what we've already built here and I just minimize this pattern, this fits far better. Another reason why this sounded good is because I added reverb onto this sound. Here's how this would have sounded if I didn't use reverb. We have that abrupt cutoff at the end of this note and it sounds awkward. What reverb does is it creates a tail, which makes it sound much more natural and fit into your beat much better. But there's another way to get your sample to sound more natural. Let's find yet another sample to add in. Here we have this orchestral sample. Now most samplers will give you the option to play around with the attack and the release, and this will help you the exact same way that using the reverb helped. Let's look at this next sample here. This is probably the most important part of the loop. To get this to actually fit, I used repitching, which is necessary to get your samples to fit in with one another. And this is probably my biggest piece of advice when trying to use samples in this way. Stay away from sounds like this. Instead, you should use something like this. What makes this part of the sample harder to use is that it's a chord, and here's why this matters. Let's say, for example, this chord is made up of 4 notes. As you repitch it, you're going to need to hope that all 4 of the notes work with whatever you've built. And even if just one of these notes sounds off and it doesn't fit, your beat won't sound good. But if you use this part of the sample instead, it'll be easier to use because it's a single note. So if we repitch this to fit our beat, it becomes as simple as finding the one note out of 12 that sounds the best. What's also great about using single notes like this is that you can literally place another chop at the exact same note and then repitch this a different amount, and you can use this approach to create longer phrases that you can then piece together into a melody. Now, one thing that you might have noticed is that some of these chops move faster than others. This is yet another helpful way to get your samples to fit with one another. By using different stretching amounts, you can control just how long each chop is and create different rhythms or get your samples to fit into tighter spaces. But at this point, we're going into some actual sampling techniques. So if you want to learn more sampling techniques that will help you sample even better, check out this video next to me. By using what you've learned in this video and the one next to me, you'll become a sampling king in no time. So go ahead, click that damn video and become a sampling legend.